everybody, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Goot Reaction. I'm here with my main man from the Midwest, and we got to talking after we recorded our most recent episode about analysis of capitalism, late stage capitalism. And so we oftentimes follow up afterwards and just kind of critique what we did and talk about how we felt the episode went, etc. And wouldn't you know it, some other ideas crept up into the conversation, and we just got kind of going on a number of tangents about ways that we could have added to that episode. So we thought it would be a perfect opportunity to make a bonus episode about it. And what we're really going to focus on specifically is things that we think can be actually done about it, not just trying to be critical and, cynical all the time. It's easy enough to do that, but we also like to try to be, a little bit productive and, try to think of solutions potentially to some of these issues that we bring up. So we thought we'd spend this bonus episode talking about those things. We've got a handful of different points to talk about, and as usual, we may just digress a little bit and chase some other ideas. So again, welcome to the episode, and let's get going. So I think it was important to note how Triple M mentioned at the end of the episode how it's really about what policies, what ideas would benefit the most people and the people that really need help, instead of focusing on what's going to benefit the minority and what what a plutocracy might be. And so, what can we focus on that is really going to help more people and or underserved communities or minority populations that don't really have people looking out for them all the time. So one of the first things that we talked about a little bit was ways to fix access to fresh foods and produce by a couple different things. So I guess we'll just take a step back super quick here and talk about farming and distribution of food and how certain communities don't have access to fresh food in all cases. And so we were thinking one of the ways is, subsidizing, instead of subsidizing farmers directly to produce certain crops that go towards processed foods or maybe unhealthier foods, then actually look at ways that we can subsidize that supply chain to get produce subscription boxes in the hands of low income folks, in especially those living in food deserts, because that potentially could help farmers directly. You're still finding ways for them to get buyers for their crops. They don't just have to do feed corn or soybeans, that kind of thing. They can actually look at healthier produce, and that way they can rotate their fields doing different crops. They're not always growing the same things on all their fields, which is good for productivity and sustainability. So you're helping farmers on that side. You're helping potentially the co-ops and the farmers markets that then ingest that produce and then distribute it to the end consumers, which again often don't have access to those types of foods. And you're really helping them create a more nutritional, well-balanced diet. And especially if they're on a budget, you can again subsidize both the farmers through their products being purchased and then by the co-ops, and then the co-ops distributing it to the areas of food deserts. And then if you have to subsidize any of that aspect of it, you are looking at the end consumer and or the middleman trying to get the products in from the farmers and then to the end consumer. So a couple different ways to look at that is, again, providing a necessary service to an end consumer, and then also rewarding the original producers on the front end, the farmers themselves. So I think that could be a really interesting option.
Yeah, I know one of the things we talked about, when we were talking the other day was the idea that I think, a lot of times farmers get subsidized on the price of the corn or soybeans that they're producing, because the market itself wouldn't necessarily generate enough revenue for them to profitably, grow those products. So they get subsidized at the price level, and then that product just makes its way through the market at whatever that, its actual price is. So that what we were talking about is if you could
Hmm.
subsidize it on the consumer end, then that hopefully that higher price would flow through the market and still get the same benefit to the farmer, but also help the people who can't afford the product. So yeah, it would definitely be something that'd be helpful. I know that we'd probably get a little pushback on a lot of those big farms that produce tons of corn, tons of soybeans. They have all the machinery and stuff that's geared towards that production. So there would be some issues with, um, I'm sure with like, okay, well, if I want to grow something else in that field, I'd have to have different equipment, or I'd have to have, maybe some, laborers instead to pick those things. So there would be a lot of
Hmm.
challenges there, um, but I think the subsidizing the customer side would, hopefully take care of that. Again, we're not economists. We're just throwing out
Yeah.
ideas and talking about things. Um,
Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
another,
So yeah, I think real quick to respond to that. I mean, I think that way you are again to kind of I mentioned briefly the sort of the sustainability of those corporate farms. If they're constantly doing one or two different uh, products, and they're either letting fields go fallow for a season or two, rotating, and so they're always kind of going through areas of unproductivity versus those fields that can be productive. If you incentivize them to fill up all their fields, but then constantly they're rotating different things, they're growing different things, they're purchasing seeds from different people, they're buying different machinery, they're employing maybe some people to help them pick where they can't use machinery. So really you're kind of stimulating the economy at various levels with an approach like that, and you're also then helping hopefully to make them more sustainable and more fully productive instead of having to let parts of their acreage go fallow for a given season. And again, not farmer, not an economist, but just some common sense, at least what seems to be common sense concepts that at least would be worth exploring.
yeah, I'm sure there's always challenges in certain climates. Obviously in the more northern
Sure,
climates, the
sure.
winter's not too productive for them for anything. But
Yeah.
I know that one other thing we talked about the other day too was, and maybe this was on your list, but I remember hearing statistics several years ago about how much food gets wasted
Yeah.
because we don't, it's not, produce isn't pretty enough to make it on the store shelves. So it basically just gets wasted, and, a lot of times just rots in the field because it won't get picked.
Yeah.
And I remember we couldn't remember the name of it. We probably should have looked it up, but there was
Mhm.
a service we both recalled that was where you could buy, kind of one of those mail order services, but you could buy sort of the blemished, produce,
Mhm.
and finding a way to get all that food into the market would be, nothing should go to waste, right?
Right.
It's frustrating because I remember hearing at the time that half the food was getting wasted, but then I'm hearing on the back end that we have to have factory farming, we have to have this mass agriculture because we got to grow, otherwise we won't be able to grow enough food for everybody. Well, both things can't be true. Like, you can't tell me we
Mhm.
need this one thing if half the food we're growing then goes to waste because it's just not pretty enough, you know.
Right.
So that's I don't know, something
Yeah.
I'd love to see fixed.
Yeah. The numbers that I was looking at was somewhere between 30 and 40% of the total food supply annually is wasted, and then that translates to about $160 billion in value every year.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe that service that was selling that blemished food cut in that 10%. But I remember, like I said, I remember several years
Right.
ago I was here and it was a good half. So
Yeah.
if we're down to 30
Yeah.
or 40, that's great.
Yeah, and then could be different sources too, citing different raw data. But either way, anywhere between 30 and 50% is still a massive amount for a population that I wouldn't say is fully fed in any given month. If you think about childhood poverty, if you think about homelessness and just hunger in general, and just all these concerns around food security, um, you know, so
Yeah, heck, subsidize. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. If you have farms and laborers that are picking this produce and they're making the decision, okay, I'm taking this one or I'm not taking this one because this one's pretty enough and this one's not. subsidize them to pick it all and send the less pretty stuff to the food banks and the Salvation
Mm-hmm.
Army and the soup kitchens and put it to good use, helping the people.
Yep.
You know what I mean? If a little bit of my tax money went to that, I think I'd be all right with it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Because think of all the upstream positive benefits of that. You give people food security. That's just one less thing that they have to worry about. And then you can start tackling those other things, that impact daily life
Yeah.
for
And you already
people in
have
those
people doing the
communities.
work. It's not like you got to
Yeah.
go do extra
Yeah.
work or just, put one in one basket and one in the other. And,
Yep.
I know it's more complicated than that, but it
Yeah.
seems conceptually like there's still a way we could do this and not let that food rot.
Right.
It
Right.
rots because it's not going to be profitable. We'll make it somewhat profitable to that producer.
Yeah. I mean, even if it was then good profits on the stuff that was aesthetically pleasing and or by whatever standard they're using, and then some per pound rate that would at least allow them to break even on the rest of it, and then that goes to good places. So yeah, so definitely thought that was an interesting concept. Another one, switching gears a little more to the financial industry, thinking about, and this is just more of a thought experiment, more of a pie in the sky kind of thing. But, if you think about how people with lower credit scores and maybe some questionable financial marks on their history, they're the ones that are usually paying 25, 30, 35% on, interest rates on their credit cards. They're the ones that, if they get a car loan, they're paying, 7, 8, 9, 10%, even outside of normal high inflationary rates. There's just a lot of downside to being poor. I mean, it's expensive to be poor. Let's just put it that way. And so why not actually switch that up? I mean, the rich customers with good credit scores, positive financial history. There's a lot of good reasons why that is the case for them. But why should they get then all the rewards? So if you're thinking like, why not just flip it around, for a second and think maybe the customers that don't have the best credit scores or just starting out, maybe give them easier access to capital or to credit and charge the affluent customers a higher rate. Still give them some perks, still make it worth their while to use your service, to use your money temporarily, but they're usually not going to carry a balance anyway. So I don't know. I was just kind of thinking how it's certainly not going to impact the richer customers in the same way that a higher interest rate, where you're paying more in fees and interest than you are your balance, your actual principal on the money that you've borrowed. So I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting approach, and just think about how it would stimulate the economy overall if, instead of just making a handful of ultra rich banks and lending institutions more wealthy, millions of people could have access more real dollars to spend on goods and services. And so I think that would ultimately essentially trickle up instead of the classic bullshit trickle down economics that we just know doesn't work.
Yeah, that's one that I think there'd be some challenges to implement that one because of all the people that make money off it. Like you said, it's kind of there's a when you are poor, unfortunately, it's everything is exponentially harder. To
Mm-hmm.
your point, you're trying to get credit, you're trying to improve your life, trying to move forward, and everything. It's a higher rate, you're paying more. It's harder to dig out of that hole, but we do live in a very consumer society. So to your point, also, if people could get past that and move to where they're able to purchase products easier, purchase goods, purchase services, then it would stimulate more parts of the economy. I think that's why you hear about it in a lot of political conversations, the idea of, doing something about the payday loan
Mm-hmm.
industry. That's, you hear more talk about that than you necessarily do like credit cards, but it's kind of the same thing, right? It's people trying to get access to money ahead of their paycheck or something because they need to pay for something. But then there's a lot of predatory behavior around that, high interest, loopholes in the loan process and things like that. Yeah, I mean, it would definitely help. Like I say, just in the current model, that one would be I think a tough one
Yeah.
to pull off, those large credit card companies. Everything here,
Yeah.
I think there is a theme. A lot of what we've talked about so far would require some government involvement, I think. And that's what
Hmm.
does tend to turn a lot of people off when you talk about, government involvement in things. But I think, I can't remember if we said it the other day or not, but when the struggles I have with the free market is that the free market doesn't always produce a solution for people, right? The
Hmm.
market works for the market, and when people really need things, it's only gonna come to fruition if it's profitable. And sometimes you may need the government to step in and be involved there. Now, I'm not saying there's different spectrums that the government could fully take over an industry,
Hmm.
which nobody, most people don't want. I don't even think I want it necessarily. It would, it would depend. Certain things, maybe healthcare. I could argue that, but
Hmm.
I'm all for the market on things like, and I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, I know, but I'm all for the market on things like iPhones. Hey, if Apple and Samsung want to compete to sell me the best phone, great. If Ford and Chevy and Toyota and Honda want to compete to sell me the best car, fine. Now, prices are getting out of hand on a lot of those things. I'd love to see
Yeah.
the prices
Yeah.
come down. That's a whole nother conversation. But I'm fine that the government, for the most part, stays out of that. But things like healthcare, when you start talking about necessities, healthcare, food, shelter, well, maybe we do need our representatives in the form of the government representing the people to act on our behalf. And that's kind of what I know we got into a lot of that in the previous episode, so I won't go there. But on the credit card idea, yeah, you'd have to have somebody step in and kind of, I think you'd have to have somebody come in and influence that. You wouldn't,
Hmm.
you know, credit card companies sure aren't going to do it on their own.
Yeah. But it's interesting, though, too, if you think about giving access to capital to people that wouldn't necessarily have it, or as cheaply as maybe we're suggesting that they have it. If you really think about it, that could potentially lead to more longer term customers that use other products from you, customers that make you money in other ways once they are out of just this cycle of paycheck, spend it all, get a payday loan, pay exorbitant interest rates and fees, and then get right back into the same cycle again. So if you have the ability to make some savings or actually invest in the stock market a little bit instead of just all your money going to rent and food and healthcare and childcare every single month. If you start having some income that can go other places, then they'll think of you as a way to manage that money or to help them, or to help you do something with that money. So I don't know. So I think long-term thinking is not something that ultra capitalists do a lot of, in my opinion. I think a lot of it is the short term, just quarter over quarter growth, regardless of what happens in the next quarter after that. You'll deal with that when it's there, kind of thinking. And I think so. The really short term thinking there eliminates some possibilities that I think could be good for society, could be good for underserved communities, and two, could then result in some definite upside in the long term.
Yeah, I know there's you made some good points there. I got to thinking too about the with the election coming up. There's a lot of debates about housing and things like that. And I know one of the ideas that Harris has is I think a $25,000 like basically you know tax break, I think, towards like down payment on a house,
Hmm.
something like that. I might not have that exactly right. And there's a lot of the criticism of it is, oh well, that's you give that to the consumer to spend, and then the companies are just gonna the building companies are just gonna raise the prices of the house, right? It's gonna get washed out in the end because they're just gonna raise the price. But then there's that other idea she's got out there of trying to do something about price gouging, and that might be. I hear that, and I know it makes a lot of people cringe, but I go, maybe we do need something like that. I know there's different discussions, and I thought it was interesting. Brett Stevens was just on the Bulwark. I think it was yesterday's episode. I don't know if you listened to that one or
I
not, but
listened to it. I got halfway through it. I couldn't stand to listen to that guy's voice another minute. He was a joke. I can't stand that guy.
I hadn't
Had
really heard
had
much.
had to stop.
Go
Had to stop. Especially after he was talking about the price gouging. Kamala Harris being economically illiterate for thinking price gouging was part of inflation.
Well, that was
Like it was
that
almost
was
50% of it, according to
that's the
experts.
part I
Like,
was gonna say. Yeah,
yeah,
we heard all those stats, in the recent years about how companies were just taking advantage of the inflation that was occurring to go ahead and raise prices and just blame it on inflation. And the
mm-hmm.
reason the biggest thing you were able to see that supported that idea was that the whole time inflation was going on, their profits were going up.
Yeah,
Now, if they're adjusting, again, not an economist, but to me, it's a little bit of common sense. If they're just adjusting prices to deal with inflation, then their profits would stay flat.
mm-hmm.
But if their profits are going up, it means they are grabbing a little bit extra on that, on top of it. So when you're worried about the price of eggs and whatever else at the grocery store, the producers are taking advantage of you a bit. Now it's unfortunate that it's all happening. Nobody wants inflation anyway. If I understand a lot of the things I've been listening to about it, though, it was somewhat inevitable coming out of the pandemic and some of the things that were going on with the economy out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Some of the money that was spent. I love how it all gets put on Biden for that. When last I checked, I know this number is disputed, but I think in Trump's 4 years, he put twice as much on the deficit as Biden did in his 4 years. It was like 8 million to 4 million. And I know I've seen there's
Trillion.
arguments about, what's that?
Trillion, not
Yeah,
million.
trillion, sorry. And I know I've seen that there's arguments about, they're not counting the numbers right in Biden's. He actually spent a lot more. I don't know. He had more of again, we kind of mentioned it last time. Trump came into a fairly booming economy that he inherited from Obama, and for some reason still spent $8 trillion. And I know he had to spend some of that during the pandemic for the relief checks that were going out to people. So, but then he hands over a struggling economy. He's starting to recover some, but not near the economy he inherited from Obama. Biden's policies build that up. Okay, hey, everybody, just go look at the numbers. They exist. They're facts. Makes a lot of decisions to build that up. So, I mean, I hate to say it, it's the same thing with Obama when, he inherited the recession and then Republicans immediately jumped on him for spending. Well, yeah, you have to take some actions to recover.
Yeah.
So anyway, my point being, that was got on a sidetrack or side tangent there a little bit, but yeah, a lot of that inflationary, pressure that we felt was just companies just price gouging. So I think there's only one thing you can do about that is maybe step in and say, guys, you can't do that anymore. There has to be some logical method to set prices. So the government certainly couldn't be the only one setting prices, but maybe there's some kind of audit process or something that says, hey, you know what, you can make money, but you can't take advantage of the situation to hurt your customers. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think maybe there was a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I think, at one time that was supposed to do something like that. Coming out of the recession?
Yeah. If they had teeth, I mean, and, but yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And if you think about what the conditions were, so I'm not comparing COVID-19 to World War II directly, but I am saying the last time we had an event or a series of events that impacted the entire world for a prolonged period of time was probably World War II, and tax rates were super high, especially on the wealthy. We had price fixing set by the government. There was a whole office set up to manage. They would set prices. You can't go you can't charge more than X, Y, or Z for products X, Y, and Z. There were rationing protocols in place there was a lot of stuff going on that to respond to this national emergency, well, international emergency, really. And so the fact that people expected to just blow right through COVID without there being any sort of actual government intervention in a way that would prevent, some of the worst outcomes of that, and be it on the economic side or the health side. There's only so much you could do on the health side initially, of course, but yeah, I think there's got to be some happy middle ground there. Maybe not the actual up to the price controls, but saying profitability can only be a certain amount, especially when you're in a pandemic type situation. Like the fact that they didn't roll out any um, measures like that is, I think part of the reason why they got away with it for so many quarters in a row, and why inflation did get up to 6, 7, 8, 9% or whatever it was at the height of it. So yeah, and it also what's funny too is the fact that we are sitting at almost down to the 2% target that the Fed set for inflation, and yet people say, "Oh, this is inflation crisis. This is inflation crisis." It's not an inflation crisis anymore. Inflation has been really good for months and months and months now. It's a high prices crisis. I'll give them that, but it's not an inflation crisis anymore because, yeah, inflation pushed those prices up, but it wasn't. You got to think of the components that made up that inflation, and it's about the prices that those companies set for the most part, as well as the supply chain disruptions, and also then a little bit of government spending, of course, as part of that as well. But I think to continue to say that it's inflation crisis makes it sound like inflation's still high and that's why prices are still high. No, that was the past situation. Inflation is great now. We got to move on and start talking about it in a different way, I think, to be more accurate.
Yeah, the problem is I think that's where it starts to get a little too complicated for a lot of people, right?
Yeah,
The
I
things that
agree.
they feel, the things they feel are the high prices at the store and the high prices for the automobile they want to buy. And they don't, some of them, just to be honest, don't care, right?
Hmm.
And the easy thing, if you can put one word on it, oh, inflation, oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Yeah.
It's all, you know what I mean? And of course that message resonates and is being exploited by a certain side that wants to win the election coming up. So, yeah, but
Yeah.
and that's where I hate to say too, people's lived experiences do matter more than anything, and um, I hear this talk all the time about how well prices are up, but wages are up, but wages may be collectively up, but that doesn't necessarily touch every sector of every part of the consumer base, and any one individual person might not have gotten a raise. You know what I mean? So you can't just but everybody goes to the grocery store and the prices are higher. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's something everybody can feel that part of it, but they may not be experiencing the other side of it, which is that their actual pay went up. So that message isn't going to land with everybody. I kind of wish there was a better way it could get talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's almost like we were mentioning in the other episode too, the purchasing power not really being there. Again, wages technically have gone up, productivity has gone way up, but wages haven't kept up with productivity, and wages have not outstripped inflation, and your overall purchasing power isn't where it should be if that was keeping up with how costs have gone up. So yeah, I think you're right there.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when people talk about like a cost of living wage increase. Like that should be the bare minimum. Bare
Yeah.
minimum should be a
Yeah.
cost of living, and then let's talk about performance and other things from a raise standpoint on top of that. But cost of living should
Yep.
be. I mean, I hate to say it, should be. The person writing the check might disagree, but I think it should be
All right.
bare minimum requirement.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're getting a pay cut, essentially.
Yeah,
Year over
if you don't
year.
do at least that, then you're getting a pay cut.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, let's jump on to another one real quick. One now, this is something I don't think I specifically mentioned to you yet, so I'm curious to get your thoughts on this one. This one's also kind of a pie in the sky idea, but just something that just popped into my head the other day was, what about an investment fund that is run by the government? Which I know that's going to turn a lot of people off right there, but just stay with me for a second. Where the funds go to research and development into science, medicine, societal advances, where they essentially, you have your government experts, your academic people, etc., wherever they're from, they're they're using their access to all this data and the information they have and their expertise to choose ideas to develop in partnership with private firms, and then there's a profit sharing arrangement to essentially allow for a return on those initial investments. So it allows for the widest possible array of beneficial products. So, and this was in one of the podcasts, I don't remember which one listened to recently, but they were talking about how it's kind of in a way messed up that you have someone like Sergey Brin, who is a multi-billionaire. He had someone in his family pass away from Parkinson's, I believe, and so he used a lot of his what's the word I'm looking for? Charitable
Yes.
contributions. Yeah, so just to fund research into that area, and so that, which is great if you think about it. That's great that particular illness is getting attention and getting funding. I had a family member that passed away from Parkinson's as well, so I can appreciate that. But at the same time, let's say it's $1 billion, whatever. Let's say you just put $1 billion towards that. Is that really, if you asked a bunch of experts in the field, is that really the best use of those dollars? Or if he could put $1 billion into an investment fund that essentially was run by people who knew where $1 billion would be best spent, is that, and he could potentially get a return on that, because investing in research and development and science and technology and medicine and things, we give subsidies to pharmaceutical industry. They keep the profits and we just give them the subsidies up front, or we help with the research and development, etc. So why not have that slightly tweaked a little bit and still have it be a fund that you could potentially get a return on? Maybe it's a low fixed rate, but you're actually also then helping society. You're helping create advances in multiple areas, and you're relying on experts across a number of different fields deciding where those what projects should get those monies. And instead of wealthy billionaires, or whomever, just deciding, oh, this one thing gets it to the exclusion of all these other things. So, like, they're essentially acting as almost like a public policy, organ in a way with their money and letting that speak. So, I don't know. Crazy idea. What do you think?
I remember hearing that discussion now that you mentioned it. I think it might have been on one of the Bulwarks or something. Yeah, something that we both
Mm-hmm.
listened to. But yeah, that one's interesting because I can see if it goes into a general fund, somebody like him may be going, well, you know what? I'm not going to put as much money in because it's not all going to the, to the cause that I care about. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a great idea. Anytime there's R&D to just find the best solution for things, I think would be great. I mean, you mentioned the pharmaceutical industry and how much the government money goes into funding that, and sometimes even um, I think of I had a conversation with somebody one time. This was back, gosh, probably I don't know, 15 years ago or so, and this person had spent time in the military in I think the first was a Desert Storm, the first
Mm-hmm.
war in Iraq, and he's telling me what he did, and he said he worked with basically technology that became what we knew then, because I want to say probably 2009ish. The iPhone had only been out a couple of years, so I think we were still using separate GPS devices to get around
Mm.
when we wanted to, some people would buy
Hmm.
a separate GPS device to put in their car or something. And he said basically what he was using was, it was like a missile guidance system or something, but it ended up being a precursor to what became a consumer product, was GPS. And it's like, well, okay, so there, the government, I'm assuming now that maybe it was, we could have hired, might have been defense contractors or somebody that might have came up with this technology, but the government put the money into it to take advantage of it, and they did get a benefit. Obviously, we used it, in the military, but then it rolls into a consumer product, and you wondered, like, well, did the government get any kickback for that? For coming up with that technology, or is this just how the system works? But
Yeah.
so as much as there is a lot of that stuff that goes on, you wouldn't think it would be too hard to maybe do what you're saying, which is, you're talking more healthcare, but well, or not necessarily. You just used the healthcare example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe it's not too crazy. What you're saying.
Yeah.
You just got to have the right people and the right administration that maybe would want to push an idea like that.
Yeah. Essentially, if you think about it, almost like you could even make it tax free too, if you wanted to further incentivize people to not donate, but invest large sums of money into those pools. It could be just almost like a treasury bond, but of a different type, like, selling like war bonds in World War II to fund the war effort, but you got a low fixed rate of return on it. But you could essentially kind of say the same thing, where we're going to give you, this is an R&D bond for the US government, and you're going to get a solid return on it. And you're also going to be helping to invent the next technological innovations that outside of Silicon Valley, which is, again, we've talked about just kind of innovation for innovation's sake a lot of times, and not necessarily helping the most people, but helping a small minority. So why not find a way to, make something like that work? So I don't know. Could be interesting. All right, another one. So flipping the tax bracket for capital gains and income tax, so that way the government collects more revenue from investment income and less from average people that need the money in their pockets more than those that have the money out there to be able to invest and can afford to have maybe a little more off the top on their dividends and their capital gains. So I think that's a simple one, but also so deeply entrenched. The tax policy is pretty tricky to mess with. But I was just thinking that might not be a bad way to do it. I would definitely think there's been some studies on how to implement that, or what that would actually look like, because that would be a pretty big disruption, I think. But at the same time, it just seems like a pretty common sense thing to do. You always hear, especially on the campaign trail, how people are talking about, especially on the Democratic side, how most billionaires pay a lower effective tax rate on their money than firefighters, teachers, and nurses do. That's something I've heard a number of times from the Harris campaign, and I think it's a good point. If billionaires are paying effectively a smaller percentage, and granted more in total dollars, but of course, but a smaller actual percentage uh, than these other hardworking, working class people. Does that make sense? No, it absolutely doesn't. So can we can we just flip it? Just flip it and see what happens.
I think we kind of touched on that in another episode, and maybe an idea is even just make all income the same. Don't
Mm-hmm.
pick some of these certain things off and put them in this other bucket. I think I can't remember which episode it was, but I think I mentioned that for some people, everybody has a tool to make income in some way. Some people are working in industries where they use their brain a lot. Primarily others. I mean, everybody uses their brain, but manufacturing is a little more hands-on, or some of the
Mm-hmm.
labor jobs and things like that. Everybody has some tool. When you make enough money, in the way our economy works, eventually that money itself becomes a tool for income.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we say, oh, well, we're gonna treat that very differently. No, if you're making income off it, just tax it. Just tax it as income. You know, and
Yep.
like we said, I think in that discussion too, that part of that, we in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 50s, when and you mentioned a little bit earlier that when the higher tax bracket was a really, really high tax rate, and
Mm.
incentivized business owners and stuff to not just take that money out and hide it in investments and put it in investments and stuff where they themselves could make more money off of it. They just reinvested it back into their businesses, which then
Hmm.
helped the workers, which helped, you know what I mean, which then, like I said, we talk about the 50s where everybody could, you know, have one income, have a house, have a car, stay at home, wife, and the glory days, as some people want to talk about. Well, you got to look at those things that supported that, and this would be one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. There were systems and policies in place that enabled those types of lifestyles for a lot of people. And yeah, I think a lot of in modern society, people don't think about that, how the highest, in the war years and following, the highest tax bracket was 90 something percent. I mean, they were literally, after a certain point, you'd be paying 90% of your income in taxes. And so there were things in place that enabled that, but they don't want to
And
think about that.
and I don't think too many people said, "Well, geez, I'm not gonna try to be wealthy and successful because
Right.
I have to
Or
pay
just
so
give up
much."
or stop earning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah, not. I mean, maybe some did. I don't know. We'd have
Maybe.
to do some maybe, but like the company still grew, people were still successful, but yet that's the argument
Yeah.
today that if we did such a thing, then people wouldn't want to. Some people are going to be driven to be the best in whatever industry they're in. Some people are going to be driven to, make the best product. That desire is still going to be there.
Yep.
Um, I don't think it's going to just, we're not just going to fall flat as a species, as a society, if we just, charge rich people too much money.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is another one that I think plays into that is potentially heavily taxing stock buybacks. I think that's another thing that changed in the Reagan era, um, kind of allowing that. I think that was even, if I remember correctly, I think that was even something that was not possible. It wasn't just taxed. I think it was literally corporations couldn't buy back their own stock for a while, and I can't remember where that law or that enforcement or where that regulation came into being. But I think that was a thing where up until Reagan, that was something that you couldn't even do. And so now the fact that you talk about all this money going to these massive corporations, what are they doing with these big tax breaks that Trump gave them in 2017? And and again, we know it's not trickling down, it's not reaching the workers, it's buying back stocks because CEOs and the C-suite are compensated mostly with stock distributions. And how do they get the most money out of that? Well, they make sure their stock price goes up. And how do they make their stock price go up? For one, they cut costs, they keep labor costs low, they squash down their labor force, but then they also buy back their own stock, their own shares, so there's fewer shares out there in the market. So that creates scarcity, and therefore prices go up. So if you actually tax that, or even just potentially ban it again, that would be an interesting. Uh, Also, just enforcing antitrust laws, which I think Lena Khan is doing an amazing job at the FTC, and I'm really worried of all this talk of like how even Cuban, who I think you and I both, I think, respect him and like him in general, but I think the fact that he's pressuring Harris to, if she gets elected, to get rid of Lena Khan, I think is a huge mistake. And I think Lena Khan has been awesome in the FTC, and one of the best things that Biden has done, honestly, in office is put her in place. So just enforcing antitrust laws, like uh, Teddy Roosevelt was a badass with that back in the early 1900s. Broke up Standard Oil, for example. So it's not impossible. I mean, we went from the Gilded Age to then all of a sudden mass mobilization of the labor force, mass unionization, the president standing up to major corporations and breaking them up, dissolving some corporations, and then in other cases breaking them into smaller pieces so there would be not a monopoly. So I think that's possible. We've seen it being done. We've seen it done before. And then also just flat out just ensuring corporations pay a fair share on their profits in taxes. I mean, the slashing corporate tax rates again and again and again, I think is just silly. So that's just a basic one. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on those? I know that was like three different things there, but
Yeah, there was a lot there. I'll give one. Like you brought up the Trump tax cuts. If trickle down economics was effective, then wouldn't we all be sitting here sitting pretty after those massive
absolutely, yeah.
tax cuts? I mean, I think that whole thing has proved itself wrong over and over and over again. Yet we keep trying it.
Yep. Well, we keep trying it because that's what gives most money to the most already richest people, and so they just want more and more and more. And I think it becomes like
Yeah, we keep believing it. I guess is
addiction.
the problem.
Right?
Well, not all of us, but
yeah, yeah. It'll be different this time. I don't think so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember during the recession, 2007, 2008, like right after the election, as we're trying to dig out of that, a lot of the Republicans sitting there going, "Hey, we need to, slash taxes and do this and that, give, tax cuts for rich people." It's like, wait a minute, we just came off of that. The Bush tax cuts, I think, are like still in place. Why do you think that's the next logical move? Like, if I'm looking back at a lot of things that contributed to this problem, like that's what you're suggesting.
yeah.
Never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah, very true. Very true. All right. Another thing could be ending or restructuring subsidies to major industries that really don't need them because their profits are so ridiculously high already. And the first one that comes to mind, of course, is oil and gas industry, and then use those dollars for other purposes. So, just to give you some quick facts here, the oil industry in the U.S. already receives about $20 billion annually from the government in subsidies. But interestingly, if you start tallying the unpaid harm and the handouts, according to a Senate report, it's a subsidy of about $650 billion annually. So really, the majority of that is the harm that's caused from the oil and gas industry that they don't have to pay a dime to fix. So they're making all their profits. They're reinvesting some of those profits into R&D and stuff, but even after that, even after those investments in capital improvements and capital expenditures and R&D and test drilling and data mining and all that stuff that they have to do, which is expensive. So even after that, they're still making trillions around the world in sales. So, and hundreds of billions in profit, record profits lately these last few years. So why aren't they sharing some of the burden of what we know and what they know? As Triple M mentioned, I think in the last episode, they knew even back in the 70s what they were doing was going to, wreak serious havoc. And they don't have to pay unless it's like a big Exxon Valdez spill where it's obvious and you've got the ducks covered in oil and the whole coastline's just in an oil slick for miles and miles and miles. Unless it's something like that, they're really not on the hook for any of those costs. And so that's where you get that $650 billion figure from. And unfortunately, here's another sad stat is that Harvard researchers estimated that the industry was also responsible for about 8.7 million premature deaths each year. So if you think about that, that's huge. So 650 billion essentially in subsidies that either the government has to pay out directly to the companies or has to be on the hook for covering for the climate change, situations that come out of that, the natural disasters, et cetera, et cetera. And then the 8.7 million premature deaths that could be, partially attributed, if not fully attributed to damage from the oil and gas industry. So not to just pick on them, but they are kind of the big ones and the most obvious ones in terms of subsidies where they clearly don't need the money, but yet somehow we're still sending them $20 billion directly every single year. So I know you probably have a lot to say on that.
Yeah, that's some interesting figures. Another one thing I'll mention we touched on in our post conversation the other day was just everybody. I want you to think about this for a second. Like back when we were hearing a lot of conversations. Well, I mean, fracking is always a topic of conversation somewhere in the country. Back in the like mid 2000s, late 2000s, when we were, at the same time we were had companies that wanted to go punch a bunch of holes in Pennsylvania in the ground to get, in a lot of cases, primarily natural gas. And what I've understand from digging into this topic a little bit, in every well you drill, you get some amount of oil and some amount of natural gas. In some cases, natural gas is heavier. In some cases, oil is heavier. Sometimes it's pretty even. There's usually something after a well's in place to kind of separate those two products at the top. Often, sometimes there's not. But in some areas, we're targeting natural gas to go get out of the ground, out of the shale. But then in North Dakota, where they're poking a bunch of holes in the ground up there, looking for primarily oil, they were finding a bunch of natural gas, and they're just burning it off in a process called flaring, because they didn't have the infrastructure and all the stuff in place to harvest that natural gas and get it into the market. So they just burned it off. And we hear all this talk about drill baby drill, and we've got this, fossil fuels are the answer, and this and that, and we should be exporting it. Well, clearly it wasn't so profitable to somebody that it was just burning it off instead wasn't the right answer. So just like I said, everybody think about that for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I think too that I'm going to get off on a little side tangent here. Almost every major car company right now is investing in electric vehicles. You're seeing a lot of the air quote energy companies becoming, I think I mentioned this last time too, becoming involved in renewables. I think the oil industry and gas industry knows that they're coming to the end of the road in their supply, and they're going ahead and they're talking to the automobile industry, saying, "Hey, this changeover is coming. We hear a lot of times we want to believe that there's this endless supply of fossil fuels in the ground, and we got to go harvest it all." Well, a lot of people who believe that don't want an oil and gas well in their backyard. You know what I mean? Because the technology to do that has become very, very, very destructive. So just think about that when you're getting into the debate of drill baby drill versus investing in renewables. I think the companies know. So everybody do that with whatever you need to think about it.
Yeah. Well, and then just think how that then ties back to what we were just saying with in the 70s, they were already doing climate models of what, our average temperatures are going to be in the 2020s. And here we are, and they're damn accurate 50 years ago. So if you see them, to your point, if they're already starting to make major changes in their, in their business model, now, is it 30 years worth of oil left? Is it 50 years worth? Is there enough oil to still provide consumption to get around in transportation versus all the other aspects of petroleum use that's out there, and plastics and fertilizers and all those other things that we've been talking about, that needs petroleum to function. So, yeah, it definitely makes you wonder. I think you heard it here first, folks. Be on the lookout for,
Yeah.
a change.
We're not geologists either.
No, yeah, we are not.
but
we are not.
So I did dig into this. You and I have talked about this quite a bit. I did dig into this topic really hard at one point, and what I remember hearing, and people might dispute this, but the industry will tell you that there's a ton of oil available in the ground. but it's not necessarily available yet. It's
Hmm.
theorized that it's in these different rock layers and these different shale layers, and for everywhere that they go around and they well, let's put it this way: to find the places, like I mentioned, Pennsylvania in the late 2000s, North Dakota, that when they find these places that they can go poke a bunch of holes in the ground to get, well, to find those, they do like geological surveys. And in a lot of cases they go drill test wells. Well, and sometimes those test wells come up dry because either the rock isn't underground isn't ready to let go of the oil yet, basically, or the technology isn't, is, we use the word destructive, fracking is a very
Hmm.
destructive process under the ground, or the technology that they're using isn't quite there yet either. So just because they theorize that it's under the ground and they'll tell you that it's there doesn't mean they can go get it. So when we want to think about the economics of this, people talk about, we're gonna drill our way to lower gas prices. My opinion on that is never going to happen, because for them to go get a lot of that oil that they can't get, because you hear this all the time, right? That once the right likes to say that we're down in oil production, but when you look at the numbers, we're at the highest. We're producing the most
Yeah.
energy in this country that we ever have. And the other thing you hear is that, like, the Biden administration okayed the most permits that of any administration thus far, or at least more than the Trump administration. So the
Hmm.
companies are sitting on, the industry is sitting on all these permits. Well, why aren't they drilling? Because they've gone ahead and invested in the permits in the places they want to drill, but either, again, like I said, the rock isn't ready to let go of the oil yet, or the technology isn't there. Well, for them to invest in the technology to go get that oil, they're going to have to spend more money. Do you think that's going to make your price at the pump go up or down?
Yeah.
Not a trick
Yeah.
question. So this
Right.
idea that we're going to drill our way to lower gas prices, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And just ask yourself this other basic question: what other industry has ever done that? I should not say never. I don't know if the answer is fully that nobody's ever done it, but you're talking about this industry is going to go increase their supply so that your price goes down as a consumer.
Right.
That
Yeah.
rarely
Who?
that
Yeah. I
rarely
mean,
happens. Go ahead.
OPEC is notorious for saying, okay, we're going to cut production by 500,000 barrels a day or whatever, just because prices are not where we want them to be. So, and that even U.S. officials were coordinating. U.S. Oil company officials have been caught coordinating with OPEC and other oil producing countries to limit production so that cost per barrel goes up. And that was the last 10 years. So under multiple, administrations recently. So, yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen. And then just think about you've got the demand still there. You've got China, India, these other countries that are growing like crazy and expanding their middle class, and just regardless of, not even just the middle class, but just their overall consumption is going up. So demand isn't going to slow down anytime soon, even with the surge in EV and other renewables. So yeah, that's not going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my oil and gas tangent.
That was a good one. Love it. Love it. Scary, but I love it. All right, so let's end on this one. We're at an hour here, so let's end on this last one, which I think is also a pretty common sense thing. Should be pretty easy to do too. I know there'll be a lot of crusty old white guys in $5,000 suits that are going to object to this, but what about changing corporate governance, like giving labor multiple seats on boards? How hard would that be to just increase representation of unions and actually allow unions to form, expand, and have a bigger voice more easily? But why not have like union membership on some of the boards of these companies? So And even something like unions being able to as a union with the money they have from from their membership fees could buy up shares of a company that they're a part of, that they're employed by, or be bonused shares of the company so that they also have more of a say when it comes to shareholder votes. So just overall thinking about ways to increase the voice of unions and labor in the marketplace, and just thinking those might be a couple pretty low cost, um, low disruption ways to do that, and but also have a good positive impact on the working class.
At the height of union strength in this country, did we have that sort of thing in place with the unions at the? I mean, I know there's always a negotiation between companies or industries and the union, but has that ever happened? Do you know?
Not really that I've heard of. I'm sure it's not one of those things where it's never happened, but I don't think it's was ever even remotely common, even during the 60s and 70s, when I think was the last kind of peak of union membership in this country.
And I was thinking about the stock, the shareholder idea. Like, I mean, I hear companies, especially companies that have stocks available. A lot of times it's part of your compensation to get certain levels of stock, but I don't know that you know really gives the employees a voice. You know what I mean? So what you're talking about would be kind of the next level of that. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
shareholders often get to vote on some things. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
But not necessarily collectively, right? Because you'd get
Right.
a lot of people. You'd think most people probably vote in favor of the workforce, depending on where they're at in the corporate ladder. But yeah, so that's an interesting thought.
Yeah. Again, just thinking of, because a lot of these ideas would be pretty big dynamic changes in a marketplace to implement. And so we get that these aren't all like quick fixes by any means, or wouldn't have some serious disruption that go along with them. But I mean, the whole point of analyzing late stage capitalism in the first place is to say, this is a massive system we're in, and it's comprised of a bunch of smaller systems that roll up to it, and they're not all in great shape. And I don't really know that it's sustainable over the next 50, 100 years, kind of thing. So why not start making some small changes that could lead to drastic changes over time now, and see if they work? I mean, this whole country is this one big experiment anyway. So democracy, Western democracy, is a massive experiment in and of itself. So why not experiment with capitalism and give some of these things a shot? So I don't know. Any closing thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas where people will really need to decide. A lot of people get mad when the other side, and it happens both ways, will claim that people are voting against their own best interests. But this to implement some of these ideas and to improve things, like we closed in the last episode, we're talking about do things when you open this way too. Do the ideas benefit the people, or do they benefit the upper crust of society only? And a lot of these ideas will go in stark contrast to people's ideology, even at the lower level of the class spectrum. People will need to think hard as we move forward in this experiment, which is more important to them. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
they'll have to understand that their situation is not going to improve if they keep electing leaders that, while they may say things that they want to hear, are not actually working to improve the situation for that individual worker. I'll close with
Yep.
that.
Yep. That's great. That's great. The status quo is not sustainable in this case, at least in our opinion. So, all right. Well, awesome. So that ended up taking a little longer than than I thought it would.
Yes,
This was
so much
just
for the
supposed
quick
to,
follow up.
yeah, this was supposed to be just a quick little bonus episode, but again, a ton of information, a ton of interesting things to mine across this topic. So, all right, appreciate you, Triple M, and again, thank you to all of our listeners. Appreciate you joining in for this extra bonus midweek drop, and we'll see you next Saturday. All right. Have a good one, everybody. Take care.